So let's just start with Patrick and Ivete. You presented earlier. I hope you've had a chance to see or will return to see the magnificent photo and video exhibition outside the Rabbit Hunt. That was your last production. This is your newest one. The origins of this project and your history with the people of Pahokee that led to the making of this film, Skip Day.
Well, I'm sure that feels the same way. We were heavily influenced by James Blue. I think my parents moved to Palm Beach County 20 years ago, and at first as a photographer, I was really focused on the disparity in Palm Beach County. Like on one end of the county you had the Koch brothers and Donald Trump and Rush Limbaugh, and you had so much power and wealth, and on the other end of the county you had people that were just struggling to survive, the descendants of migrant workers and people who'd been brought from Haiti and Jamaica to cut sugarcane. And when I was really young, I was like so focused on why is our society why is this segregation? And then as I became more mature, I became so much more interested in the lives of the people cutting the sugarcane and how important family was, and just breaking down this segregation that had been built up by news media and
loss.
Ivete and I are so influenced by this work that came out of UCLA. Like I have a graduate degree in architecture, and I just sat in the Fine Art Library at UT watching observational film. Like this is why we're making observational work, and it's like, what a beautiful film, what a beautiful human being. Like it's just like mind-blowing.
And Skip Day is our 4th film we made in Palm Beach County, so we had been there for a while. And I'm Brazilian and Mexican, and Patrick had brought me to Pahokee to meet people and make friends. We never intended to make a film there. We were just bored in Palm Beach County, and we started making friends. And so the first film we made, The Send-Off, which we showed here last year, was about prom, because we really love rituals, and it was a way to preserve it. But like through our observational approach, it's we can capture something that is happening, but that says so much more about who we are as people and how we act around each other. And so you can see the Rabbit Hunt. It's outside in the exhibition space. The Rabbit Hunt was the second film, and Chris, who was in The Send-Off, The Rabbit Hunt, and then in Skip Day, he just brought us to all these events, and we tried to capture them as honestly and humbly as possible, and just try to, with the editing, just show what really happened that day, and then give you as an audience an opportunity to think for yourself and have this experience with us.
I want to give people a chance. If you have any questions for Patrick and Ivete, now would be a good time to ask. Congratulations, by the way, also on the award at Cannes for the film. The film is just beginning to get out now, but that was quite a launch in May.
Yes, definitely.
Anybody want to ask it over here?
Since you're kind of active in the community, did you just talk to the parents? They said your kids are going to skip school, so we want to follow them. How did you have to get the parents' consent, or were most of the kids 18, or how did you?
He's asking about their getting the parents. Was the parents' consent necessary, or did they work directly with the kids?
Some of them, but most of them were already 18. And like this Skip Day, like skipping school is so normal. Like everybody knows there's a Skip Day. So it's not really an unusual thing. There's a teacher that makes them go to school for like an hour, but it's really such a tradition. Like their parents did the same thing. You know, it's been going on for generations, and it's totally okay. So yeah, so some of them we did get like release forms from the parents, but most of them were already 18 at this point. It's like they're already graduating. I did want to say really quickly that we lived in Houston for 2 years. We were here before we got any recognition on our work, and it's really not only amazing to be here at this festival, which like we follow your programming is so excellent, but it's also just amazing to see our friends who were our supporters when we were nobody making films in a room here to come and you know, watch our film. So we're really thankful.
Thank you. Well, we can go on now to Dan and Suzanne, and maybe just, I kind of was involved in this, but say something about the origins of this and how you became aware of James Blue and what connected with you that led you to spend, how many years has it been now? About at least, is it 6 years since you started working on this? Use the microphone if you could share that.
Thank you.
Dan, go ahead.
Well, I teach at the University of Oregon, and I'm a filmmaker, and I also, in addition to film, I teach civil rights and human rights through film. And it was really through the process of teaching my students their cinema documentary production course that this came about, because they happened to be in the midst of the beginning a term of filmmaking and doing selection process on stories and ideas and stuff. And I got a phone call from Richard Herskovitz, and I can't remember verbatim, but it was an invitation to Suzanne and I both to sit in on a James Blue RIG, Research Interest Group. You may be familiar with that term if you're at a university. And I knew James Blue's work, The March, and that was about the extent of it. And Richard Herskovitz said, you know, I discovered that James Blue, this filmmaker that I had loved and studied and thought so much of all of my career, was at a University of Oregon alum. And it looks like there's some possibility that his brother might consider coming down here to the University of Oregon, and there may be some kind of special collections, archives put together. And so I joined the team, so to speak. And then I think it was maybe 2 weeks later that I got a call, and well, this big truck arrived at the archives, and it was a fall day. I think it had been raining, and
75 boxes.
They're moving this huge truck full of boxes into the archives. And I grabbed a couple of students, rushed over, and we filmed this incredible moment, observational.
And that's another film you can find online. It's called Discovering James Blue, and it's 10 minutes long. You can look that up afterwards.
And it's got lots of shots of Richard Herskovitz and James Fox and Elizabeth Peterson, who's in the film, opening these boxes and going, ooh, wow, oh, look, it's Rossellini and James Blue. And
So I'll just say, well, my connection. I had, when I was running Cornell Cinema in upstate New York, there were two people who had a big impact on me. One of them was actually I had met when I was a film student in Paris, Johan van der Keuken, who was one of these people with Costa Gavras, who was close to. And Johan, I was the person who organized his first touring retrospective to the United States. But Johan used to say to me all the time, I can't believe you Americans don't appreciate one of your greatest filmmakers, James Blue. enough. He would say that all the time. I then became friends with Gerald O'Grady and did an exhibition with him. The same thing. And actually, the last time I saw Johan van der Kuyken before he died was Gerald O'Grady showing us a print of Olive Trees of Justice at the Anthology Film Archive. Then I come to Houston to do this job and sort of discovered more about how significant James Blue was here with Swamp and the Rice Media Center, and then found out that he was an alum of the University of Oregon where I was teaching. It all just felt like this became my calling to be involved in this, and then to get Dan and Suzanne involved and work with the archive. So that's really what led up to this. And for me, wrapping up my 10 years here, this is really coming full circle. Because again, this ties together Oregon and Houston for my last decade, bigger part of my life.
So we filmed that first short film on the archives, and then just rode the wave for the next 5 years. I have a day job. I'd like to think it's filmmaking, but I teach to pay the bills. And because I get to show students these wonderful films, all of the people involved in this film, and I got to expose students to that, and so there's cross-pollination and community outreach and touching to all the students from Swamp, and all of these great people, Brian Huberman and Carlos and Janice and everyone else who's participated and continues to participate with Swamp in this incredible independent film project.
Do you want to add anything, Suzanne, about your?
One of the things that really interests me about the Blue film and the Blue project is the combination of really superior aesthetic. The question of aesthetics in film seems very important to me. And here we have amazing aesthetic adventures and trials, and that combination with the sense of what Martin Luther King called the beloved community, this sense of community, not as an isolated kind of thing that a great director undertakes high-handedly on his own as a kind of giant but solitary genius, even though we all know that thousands of people were working on his giant film, you know? But the real sense of a community working together on the making of film, that seems very, very important to me, and it fascinates me. It makes me feel so wonderful to be here, and it's like entering, for me, after working on James Blue for all these years, it's like entering a legendary place. I haven't been here before, and it's like seeing these people that I've seen in the film and heard about before in real life. So you all are very exciting to me because it's kind of like a coming home, isn't it? When you get to know people in film in this kind of intimacy, you know, you get to know people, and then to meet you is really wonderful. I hope I get to meet you more tonight after this is all over.
I'd like to add one more thing, and in case you think I did this out of the pure goodness of my heart. I've been in, even though it's been 6 years and we've worked continuously to put this together, I just feel like I landed in heaven on this project, in artistic, creative cinema arts heaven, being a filmmaker. But just a partial list of people who I've interviewed as part of this project. Gerald O'Grady, David McDougall, who is just one of the most dignified and humane people I ever met. Colin Young, who Suzanne and I got a chance to spend 10 days at his 16th century place south of London, and go to Beaconsfield and see him treated like, well, they said they invite him there because when he comes, what they say is that he spreads pixie dust. And all the students just line up. And he did that here. And he told us stories of telling his secretary, well, I'll only be working, when he was chair of the department after James left, said, I'll probably only be really working 3 or 4 days a week because I'm going to go to Houston every week. And then he said, I'd get on the plane and I would have been in the middle of all this administrative work. I'd land in Houston, I'd come to Rice Media Center, and I'd walk in and there'd be 60 people, and James Blue and Rossellini and these other people talking together. And they'd say, oh, Colin, what do you think about that? And then when I left, it was the same way. It wasn't even any formal goodbyes. It was just this movable feast and continuing conversation. James Dormeyer, Adele Nade Santos, George Stevens Jr., and James Ivory. And then Joan Churchill, who for me was when I interviewed her at her house in Venice, and her husband Alan Barker actually volunteered to shoot it. I was in love, and I've always been in love with Joan's work, and her observational work is so important. But one of the things she said in the film that I had to have in there was, look, this has always been about, and this is after she goes to the National Film School and is kind of, there's prejudice against her because she's a woman in Britain of all places. And she ends that passage by saying, look, for me and for James Blue and Colin and all of us, it really is about the people. Mm-hmm. And it's always been about the people. And this list and the list, and Richard Arskovitz here, mm-hmm. and others, Carlos, mm-hmm. amazing.
Interesting that you met Colin Young, but the footage you used was actually handed to me to be given to the archive by Brian Huberman. Brian shot that when there was, I believe, well, maybe he could tell us about the history of that. But I find that some of the strongest interview stuff is that Colin Young footage. I'm very grateful. I mean, a lot of people contributed and added to this over the years. So,
and we want to give thanks to Brian for the footage.
Any comments or questions? Yeah. Anywhere? Yes? Oh, over here? Okay.
As a historian, and also working in the art world, I'm moved by the march, which I've never seen, and want now.
Could you speak up just a little bit, because?
Okay, I'm moved by the march, which I've never seen, as an art object. But as a historian, I immediately focused in on the fact that there was, I think she said 60,000 feet of film that was edited to 3,000. As a historian, I want to see the other film.
Mm-hmm. And since it's public domain, I mean, it's the National Archive, and Chris Kovac, if you follow up after us, I'll give you her email. I'm sure she'll be happy to tell you. She's the archivist who has been working on this. If that other footage exists and she has access to it.
Because as a curator of photographers' work and et cetera, I'm always interested to go where photographers work because I want to turn around and see what they didn't photograph. And it helps me understand what they did photograph. And so in this case, I would want to, if I were looking at the films in that way, I would want to know what they didn't use, so I could better understand what they did use.
This reminded me of a program title I once saw, Outtakes Are History.
Unfortunately, Chris says they haven't located the other 57,000 feet,
Well, that's
and
very
they've made
common.
every attempt to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it's very common, sadly.
Mhm.
But I'm just curious, as filmmakers, how you feel about that film that you leave on the cutting room floor.
Yvette's a wonderful editor, and we just edited a 300 hours of information to an hour and 45 minutes. So if, as a director, it feels great to leave that footage on the floor because nobody can tolerate it in our society, if that makes sense. Like, and we made an hour and 50-minute film that we hope to premiere next year, and all our funder did was tell us it needed to be 90 minutes. And we were like, fuck you, no. It's not a 90-minute film. So we fought for every 145 minutes.
minute.
Yeah, sorry, but I'm ignorant on my wife speak.
No, we did fight for every minute over 90 minutes. But also, we also understand that maybe at some point there could be a way to repurpose some of that footage, but we also hope that you as an audience trust why we chose those minutes. Like a lot of it is pretty unusable. But a lot of it may be interesting at some point, and we preserve it if we have the means to preserve it, because that's another conversation, right? Like sometimes it's hard. Sometimes we're working with no budget, so.
I have a question here. Could you stand though so people can hear you in the back?
Yeah, I was an art history student here and did my thesis on Marcel Duchamp's 1957 speech, The Creative Act, which was actually delivered here in Houston at a conference that the Demneals helped sponsor and organize. And this brief speech in the middle of a 2-day proceeding basically was a very clear articulation of post-structuralist ideas of an artist may shout from the rooftops, but it's really up to history and the audience to define the meaning of a work of art. And it was very rewarding for me to have kind of been exposed to that through professors here at Rice who basically kind of grew up with the Demneals being around here in Houston. And so I'm curious what influence you think kind of French post-structuralist thought had, as somebody like James Blue was, quite an internationalist. And then he, obviously found a home for a period of time here in Houston. And some of those ideas really were part of the ferment where the audience is kind of determining meaning and indeed the audience has a right to kind of start thinking about editing and point of view and other things.
I'd love to talk to you in one-on-one for longer than we can do it here right now, because that interests me very much. And I'm very interested in how incredibly smart James Blue was in a cross-cultural kind of way. James Dormeyer, with whom I've become good friends, says that he always liked to live on the border between cultures, and he was obviously extremely good at languages. He was there, part of the new wave. He was one of the best in his class in France, in French, at the premier film school in France.
You're talking about James Blow. Yeah.
James Blue.
Yeah.
That seems to me really amazing. You heard him being interviewed after his film won the Critics' Prize at Cannes, and he was just being interviewed on French TV in French.
And he had all those French mannerisms too. It was
Yeah.
amazing.
And so I'm really fascinated with that, and I think that one thing he learned about making a film in Algeria was that there was much that he needed to do in his own country. Because what accounts for, this is what James Ivory asked us. There's a mystery here. He made this huge success, and then he comes back to the US. It's not just because he couldn't make another film in France for 5 years because of the contract foreigners had to sign. But he obviously, in the march, it shows, he obviously was interested in exploring all of these questions in the US from an aesthetic point of view that I think is quite French. Not necessarily post-structuralist, but certainly that observational cinema and the cinema vérité that inhabited France, where you're allowed to ask questions as a director.
A question back there, Tish?
Hi, I'm glad you came to show this film here at the Media Center. Thanks for coming. I want to talk a little bit about the content of this film and the form of the film. So we're looking at a film about such a vibrant, interactive, with the people person, and I really feel like this film is very static outside of the archive material that we're seeing of James's, which is really lively. I feel like the film that you've shot around the archive material is very staid and very static and doesn't really engage life the way that we're taught to in the James Blue way, this dancing with life as cinematographers. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about the form of the film, which is, very different than James's work, and I think different than James's, personality that we all admire. We teach documentary here, and our documentary students aren't allowed tripods. They can't have them. It's verboten here. They have to be prepared to dance with what comes in front of them. And so I just wish you could talk a little bit about the form, your choices as a filmmaker, your creative choices as a filmmaker. You've talked about this famous, really wonderful, you've fallen into this, I think you said, you fell into this glorious creative experience. So could you talk about your creative expression as a filmmaker here?
Well, hopefully Richard can translate because I couldn't hear you. I apologize.
She's asking about the form of the film being fairly static, the construction of the shots. There's maybe a lack of James Blue's own cinematic experimentation and vitality in the way you treated the material. Is that?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
I really followed the interviews and the material that I had, and there wasn't a lot to film that was observational, and James's films, I see vitality in olive trees, for instance. I see a lot of vitality in the march, but I also see that those are observational films in many ways, and that he's out within the experience that's playing out. I'm doing an archive and an archival film that's a history of James and his work, and I'm really not doing observational film. I had the opportunity, plus I'm on a budget, which shouldn't determine form in the end, but I also can't artificially impose something new and stylistically that's not there in the origins of the film. I'm working with the archives, his films, and the interviewees. I believe, and one of the things that will occur in the film, that the film is, and we battled with this, it's one of the reasons the last couple of years, one of the things we've been doing is trying to make it so it wasn't so kind of elegiac, kind of looking back, or that it wasn't hagiography. And I think we've done a pretty good job of that. I can't artificially put in other aspects of his life that I don't have from the interviewees. So really, I think Carlos's interview is typical. People love this guy, and also I'm not James in the sense that James was described to me in many ways as he had a battery, and he was in constant motion. What was said in the interview by David McDougall about what went on here, right here in this area, was that James Blue they'd show a film almost every night. Once or twice a week they'd have a major filmmaker in, and they'd do study groups, and they'd do panels, and they'd do interviews with Marcello Fools or Rossellini, who I think was here 4 times. And James was kind of in perpetual motion during that. The story I told that Colin Young said is that he came here and then he just walked into this perpetual motion circumstance of activity, etc. And then as James Blue moved forward, he was doing experimentation in the 60s and was emblematic in some ways of that in a swamp. And Richard can tell you more about the urban complex documentary. But again, the opportunities I would have formally to film a panel of people taking phone calls from folks who had just seen scenes in the Fourth Ward and discussions about what were the causes of the poverty, or the causes of the city administration not taking care of the sewage systems or drainage systems, the same kind of flooding going on. And that to me is an exciting part of telling the story. I hope it comes through in, you're right, a very formal, very conventional, conventionalized form, which is a string of interviews in archival footage. That struggle about it being elegiac, though, as well, I think we won't, I promised, and we won't, this is a premiere, and we won't be doing a lot of work, but part of the work will be with score and soundtrack, and I think that'll go a long way in terms of creating more energy formally within the film, and if we have time, we'll look for other ways to
I want to respond to that question, okay? And so here Ivete and I are. We're observational filmmakers. I feel James Blue has totally been he's totally lost to the history of film. Like D.A. Pennebaker, Les Blank, Robert Drew, like these are the names we know. Okay, these are the names, I watched that film. I'm an artist making observational work, and I watched this film and I'm like, I need to do, I'm not creating a movie. Our films are showing, and we meet kids from Stanford and Harvard, and they're like, our professors show your films, we love your, but I need to do something. And James Blue, like when I watch that film, like I feel the responsibility of that man's life to do something. So though that film is not, it may not be, the way James Blue made film, like it affected me. And I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna make the next swamp with my wife and we're gonna do something. So even if that film isn't aesthetically like high art, like it affected me, and I'm carrying his torch, and my wife is carrying his torch, and that film really moved me. So if it didn't, like if the students aren't using tripods, or I understand that, but that film, like that life that he led, like I needed to see that as an artist, and it moved me. And I'm gonna carry on that legacy. So, like that's my response to the question. Maybe not everyone's take on the film, but yeah, I get what you're saying, and I understood why he made the film that way, and I received it. And like so much of art is like reception, and I received their film, and I needed to receive it, if that makes sense.
We have.
I do want to make one more brief comment. This is, I've made some observational films. This is specifically a string of interview films. And one of my tasks and responsibilities was to present to you that David McDougall, who is considered one of the great ethnographic filmmakers in the world today, Joan Churchill. Joan's husband, Alan, said she never sits for interviews. So in a sense, this film is experimental and outrageous in that Joan Churchill sat and presented to you her honest and sincere words. And, Alan shot it for me and loved the way it was shot. So there is something to be said for those who work with interviews and as the main spine of their stories. And I've listened to debates between Fred Weissman and Errol Morris and others. Patricio Guzman is films interviews, and the human face in those interviews, no matter how statically they appear to be filmed, it's the play of emotion on the face that, to me, is the most important and comes through, and I hope that adds some excitement and emotional weight to the film.
We just have time for maybe 3 more, and they'll be here, there, and there. Okay, over there.
So I'm really fascinated by this concept of observational cinema, because as soon as you make that cut, you're putting a perspective on it. So forgive me if you've already answered this earlier, but what is your take on your personal take on how you make those choices? Are you really thinking mostly about whatever narrative or story you're trying to tell, or how you feel your subjects? What is the truth from the subject's point of view, or are you, kind of how do you navigate that landscape? And I'm curious if in the James Blue kind of background, if answers came out about that as well. But I'm curious from Patrick and Ivete as well.
Well, in my case, it's completely reactionary to what we captured. So we are capturing, first and foremost, like we come in with a question, we come in with a desire. So in our case, a desire to capture a ritual that is happening every day in the United States and not always represented, in rural communities of color. And then we just let things happen in life, and then we really watch the footage with a lot of attention. But like in the moment, we are reacting to what's happening. And so we were noticing, for example, people leaving the beach. There was no way to not notice that. And so I'll just use that as an example because we captured all that. And that was like the most, as an editor, the hardest thing for me to edit, because I wanted to make sure that I was always making the kids my top priority, and also like the most important thing in every one of my shots, and whatever was happening with the people around them, which was not the best behavior, was just part of the kids' experiences, and that they were the most important thing all the time. But like there was literally no footage of the kids arriving where people weren't leaving. And so using that as an example of how I edited that, I just, I am listening and I'm watching what is transpiring in front of us. We are trying in the shooting to be as invisible as possible, and just making sure that people are not paying attention to us so that we can capture these things. And then when that, like Frederick Wiseman would say, you come in without knowing too much. Like we know a lot, we know the kids very well, but we didn't know any of that was going to happen, and we felt a responsibility to portray that the way that it happened. So that's kind of, I feel like that's the process. We come in saying, okay, we need to show this community thing, and we ended up showing it anyway. Like the conversations between the kids were really beautiful and like very relatable to everyone, and just like this like moment in time that's fleeting, where people are still young and the future is coming. So we're successful in showing that, but we then also have to listen to our environment and say, oh wow, this is how people behaved, and it's truthful because it happened in front of the camera, and I need to edit it to reflect all of those things. So that's kind of the process for us.
I'd like to say that I loved your film before I say one more word. I really loved your film, and the way you film. I just think it's marvelous. But it's clear that we're not doing that. We're not doing the same kind of film here. What we're doing is trying to give audiences a sense of a history and a theory and a way of thinking about film that I think was also very important to James Blue. And if you really want to see what that part of James Blue was about, you need to listen to and look and read the 76 interviews he did with other filmmakers.
And see his films.
And see his films, but to understand that part of him, you don't get it in his films directly in that way. You get it in the way that he's interviewing other filmmakers about their filmmaking. You got a piece of it in this film, in that conversation about the long shot, and he was very interested in the use of non-actors. You can observe his use of non-actors, but then talking about it is a different thing. And he was very interested in talking about it. I'm very interested in theory, in film theory, but it's not the same as writing a poem. It's not the same. And as a scholar of literature, do I write the poem or do I write about the poet? It's two different motions, and
you couldn't do an observational film about James Blue because he's not alive anymore. So
himself. Well, we could, include what we've got.
Footage, but
Yeah.
like this is exactly your truth. We're all trying to say our truth, and this is the way you found to present that truth. And
that's
I just want to take this chance to thank you for giving me the gift of your film this evening. And the closest, and the way I've described observational film in the past and my students and that I love, is it was like breathing. It was nothing artificial about it. It was like being in nature and around people, to me, and just breathing life in a minute. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
You had a question over here? Yes, sir.
Was not
I'm sorry, not behind you. There, yes.
One of the things about James as a teacher is, besides teaching classes here and making films and doing Swamp, he also taught continuing education classes at night.
Really?
Yeah,
I didn't know that part.
I came here and took class in this theater from him back in the 70s, and I grew up watching films as a kid all the way through and loved movies. but I had no idea what I was looking at until I took his class. He was really special.
And there was one question over here. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Thank you guys for your documentary. I am a film and photography student, right? And I really like the idea of kind of like combining this like civil activism and like artistic expression together. But I'm just wondering, this is kind of like a question for like all of you guys. I feel like with like digital technology and social media and all that stuff, our attention span is kind of like getting shorter and shorter. So I'm just wondering, like, what do you guys see as the, like, I guess the opportunities and also the challenges that we have in terms of as we enter like this digital age, and what we can do as like students to help further promote this kind of like civic activism and artistic expression.
Well, can I speak to this real quickly? So in my opinion, there's never been a more exciting time to visually storytell, because like I can just pull this out of my pocket. You know, I have an app called Filmic Pro if I want to shoot something really good, like they have on their cameras. I can do it with this little thing, and you know, attention spans are short, but people still want to see great art. They still want to see great stories. So Sundance gets 9,000 submissions. South by in Austin gets like 8. And we're friends with the programmers, and they say, even though we get 9,000 submissions, there's still the same number of great works that there were in 1998. You know, it's like, so there's a lot of things, like that's why curators are so important, because they present to us like really great things that we don't have the time to sift through. But like with your phone, you can see something profound like a march, or you know, you can see something profound like a person from the government, a police officer abusing someone on the street. You can capture that. Could be a minute, it could be a 10-minute shot on your phone, but you know, that's observational film, and those kind of things have the power to change society. So like when I'm 42, when I was your age, like an Avid editing system was $40,000. Like I had to go have a friend who interned at NFL Films in Philadelphia. And you know, all these like young people are like, oh, we hacked this, we hacked. Well, I used to hack NFL Films, and we used to go into their office at night and edit, like, and it was like 2 beta tape players. So you can edit on your phone, and that's true power. Like you're all journalists, like, and you all have the ability to film make, you know, and it. You know, whatever you take away from that, you can take away. But I love that. I'm shooting my next film. I'm shooting on the iPhone, and I'm so excited. Like I just love shooting on the iPhone. It's like I don't have to set all this crap up, and you know, it may not be good. You know, I may be over the hill, but yeah, I'm excited about it.
And as the editor of Patrick's work and our work, I can say that there's a word in Spanish, which is verborrea, which means diarrhea of the mouth.
Yeah.
And I think that there's kind of a diarrhea of the media nowadays, and that we have to be very rigorous. Like if you want to make it, like as Patrick's saying, it's very exciting. We have all these possibilities, but if we want to make good work, we have to be rigorous about the aesthetic. Like we have rules for what we can do and what we can't do with our film. Like as you said, as you saw it, we don't have like music on top of it. Like we have all these rules to make good work, and that those rules come from watching previous filmmakers and that history that, you know, these amazing filmmakers here have captured in James Blue work, and you know, just getting that education and then synthesizing that in what is the aesthetic that you want to show. And so that's like kind of the balance between all these possibilities and what you actually can do with good films.